All right, strap in, everyone, because we are diving into one of the most exciting NFL weekends, I think, we've seen all season.
Yeah.
Week 13 had it all. Snowstorms, overtime thrillers, and, of course, a whole lot of teams fighting for those playoff spots.
Oh, yeah.
We've got our playbook here from FX Sports Roundup article to break down the key moments and what they really mean for the rest of the season.
What's so fascinating about this week is how each game had these ripple effects, impacting division standings and the wild card race in ways we really didn't expect.
Yeah, it really is like watching dominoes fall across the entire league. So let's start with a visual. Picture this. Snow falling in Buffalo, packed stadium, and the Bills just completely dismantling the 49ers 35-10.
And it wasn't just the score. It's the way they controlled the game, especially their run game. That was a statement to the rest of the AFC. Remember, they were facing one of the toughest defenses in the league.
Yeah.
And they made it look easy.
Okay, so they dominated, but you mentioned ripple effects. Break down how one game like that impacts the rest of the league.
Well, this win, it wasn't just a win.
Right.
It clinched the AFC East for the Bills.
Oh, wow.
So they secured the division title. They're guaranteed a playoff spot. And most importantly, a home game in the playoffs.
Oh, wow.
That's huge for any team.
Okay, so for listeners who might not, be following every single thing going on, break down what clinching a division means for the rest of the season.
Imagine it like this. The Bills basically won their mini championship within their division.
Oh.
It doesn't matter what happens in the rest of the regular season. They get to put their feet up. They can rest their star players if they want and just get ready for the playoffs.
And home field advantage, that's got to be a big deal, right? Especially in the playoffs.
Absolutely. Just think about the energy of that crowd in Buffalo, especially in a playoff game.
Yeah.
That's an advantage that can really, sway the outcome.
So Bills fans, I imagine they're celebrating, but what does this mean for other teams in the AFC East, like the Patriots, the Dolphins?
Well, teams like the Patriots and Dolphins who are still hoping for a playoff run, they now have to fight for a wild card spot. Their path to the playoffs just got a lot tougher.
Wow. Okay, so one game really does have massive implications for the entire conference.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to another thriller from Week 13, the Buccaneers just squeaking by the Panthers in overtime.
Overtime.
Yeah, overtime. Tell me, what made this game so exciting?
Well, overtime games always have a certain drama, right?
Yeah.
But this one went down to the wire.
Oh, okay.
Both teams traded blows, and you could feel the tension building with every single play.
So what was the turning point? I mean, was it that incredible defensive stand in the fourth quarter? Or was it Tom Brady just working his late game magic yet again?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It was both, really. The defense came up huge when it mattered most, which gave Brady the chance to orchestrate another one of his signature comebacks. I mean, the guy seems to thrive under that kind of pressure.
Tom Brady, I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah, right.
But I think what was really fascinating here was the resilience of both teams. They fought tooth and nail for that win, and it just shows how much every single game matters in this fight for playoff contention.
Absolutely. Every win, every loss, it all adds up in the grand scheme of the season. And speaking of closely fought battles, how about that clash between the Eagles and the Ravens?
Oh, man, that was a matchup everyone was talking about. It felt like a preview of a playoff game, with two powerhouse teams going head-to-head.
Both teams have these explosive offenses, strong defenses, star quarterbacks.
Yeah.
It was a chess match from the very first snap.
And in the end, the Eagles pulled out the victory, 24-19, a big win for them. But it wasn't a blowout by any means. What were some of the key moments that you saw that led to their victory?
Their defense, the Eagles' defense, really stepped up in the second half, creating turnovers and putting a lot of pressure on the Ravens quarterback, and their ability to make adjustments and capitalize on those crucial moments was a big factor in their win.
So we've seen the Bills clinch their division, a nail-biting overtime finish, and a clash of tight ends, which I think we can all agree could be a preview of a playoff matchup.
Absolutely.
But wait, there's more. Week 13 had so many incredible games, and we're going to jump into some of those other pivotal results that are shaking up that playoff picture.
Yeah, this was a week where any given Sunday really did apply. We saw the Rams grind out a win against the Saints, and the Texans, despite a lot of folks writing them off, they managed to pull off a close win against the Jaguars.
And the Seahawks, they had a convincing win against the Jets. Do you think their recent success is a sign of things to come? I mean, could they? Could they actually be a contender?
It's definitely an interesting development. They've been playing with a lot more confidence lately, and their quarterback is starting to hit his stride.
Yeah.
The question is, can they maintain that momentum as the season winds down? Because the NFC is wide open right now.
That's what makes this part of the season so thrilling. Every game has the potential to completely change that playoff landscape.
Oh, yeah.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty of that wild card race and those teams battling for a spot, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more analysis from NFL Week 13, and trust me, you don't want to miss this. All right, we're back, ready to unpack even more of this crazy Week 13 in the NFL. Some pretty surprising outcomes this week, right?
Yeah.
It definitely threw a wrench into those playoff predictions.
You know what I think is so fascinating is seeing those underdogs really start to rise up and challenge some of those established teams. It's making the playoff picture a lot more unpredictable.
Oh, yeah. And we talked about the Bills clinching the AFC East. But there are some other teams that made big moves this week, too, right? Like, how about the Vikings? They managed to squeak past the Cardinals. What were your takeaways from that game?
Well, the Vikings, their win was all about resilience. You know,
Yeah.
they were down at several points in that game, but they just kept finding ways to answer back. I think it really speaks volumes about, you know, their mental toughness and their ability to handle pressure.
It's funny you mention that because the Chargers, they had a tough one against the Falcons, too, but they also came out on top. Do you think these close wins say anything about a team's ability to perform, once we get to the playoffs?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I mean, while a win is a win, right? I think the way a team wins can definitely reveal, you know, some of their strengths and weaknesses. Those close games where a team has to fight for every yard, every point, it can really expose those areas that need some improvement.
So you're saying for the coaches watching these games, they're not just looking at the final score. They're looking at how the team got there.
Exactly. They're looking at the execution, the decision-making, the adjustments they made throughout the game. You know, these close wins, they can actually be really valuable learning experiences, especially as we head towards the playoffs, where every single play matters.
Absolutely. Speaking of valuable lessons, how about the Steelers? Pull off a victory against their division rivals, the Bengals. What did you see in that game that impressed you?
Their defense, the Steelers' defense was the difference maker in that game. You know, they were relentless in putting pressure on that Bengals quarterback and just disrupting their offensive rhythm. It was a classic AFC North slugfest. But, you know, the Steelers' defense, they ultimately won the day.
It seems like defense was a big factor in a lot of these Week 13 matchups. And I think that's something that our listeners should really be paying attention to. You know, as the weather gets colder, those games get more intense, and a strong defense can really be a team's best asset.
Oh, absolutely. In those tight playoff games where every point is at a premium, you know, that solid defense, it can be the key to victory. It's often said that defense wins championships, and I think we saw a glimpse of that in Week 13.
Okay, so we've covered some of the closer games, but there were also some pretty decisive wins this week that really shook things up, like the Colts pulling off an upset against the Patriots. What made this game so surprising to you?
Well, the Colts win, it was a combination of strong defense and opportunistic offense. They forced those Patriots into several turnovers and then capitalized on those mistakes. You know, it was a reminder that in the NFL, any given Sunday, any team can beat any other team.
It's the beauty of this league, right?
Yeah.
The Colts, they weren't expected to win that game at all, but they played with a lot of heart, a lot of determination. Do you think this could actually be a turning point for them? I mean, could they actually, make a playoff push?
It's definitely possible. They're still in the hunt, but they have a tough road ahead. The remaining weeks are going to be crucial for them to prove that they can, consistently perform at a high level.
And speaking of turning points,
Yeah.
the Commanders, they absolutely dominated the Titans, 42-19.
Yeah.
What stood out to you about that game?
Just the Commanders' offensive execution was incredibly impressive. You know, they were balanced, they were efficient, it seemed like they were clicking on all cylinders.
Yeah.
And their defense was equally as impressive. You know, they stifled the Titans' offense and created some turnovers.
So would you say this was like a statement win for the Commanders? I mean, does this put them on the map as a serious contender?
It definitely sends a message, I think, to the rest of the league that they are not to be taken lightly. They've been quietly building momentum all season long, and I think this win puts them firmly in the playoff conversation.
It's amazing how one week can completely change the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Teams that were flying under the radar are suddenly making headlines, and those playoff races, they keep getting tighter and tighter.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this part of the season uh, so captivating. We're starting to see the playoff picture come into focus, and every single game has these huge implications for which teams are actually going to make the cut.
All right, so before we move on and analyze what this means for the playoffs, I kind of want to pause for a second and dig into some of the individual performances that really stood out to us this week.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there were some incredible displays of athleticism and talent out there. Players stepping up, making big plays, and really proving why they're considered to be among the best in the league.
Absolutely.
It's easy to get caught up in, the team narratives, but those individual performances, they can be just as compelling.
Oh, for sure. Those game-changing plays, those clutch catches, the incredible defensive stance, they all contribute to the drama and excitement of the NFL. And sometimes it's just one single player that can elevate their whole team to a victory.
All right, so let's talk about some of those standout players from
Yeah.
this week. Who really caught your eye?
Well, we can't really name specific players, but I will say this. There were some quarterbacks who delivered absolutely incredible performances under pressure.
Hmm.
They showed poise, accuracy, and just the ability to make those clutch throws when it mattered the most.
Yeah. And it wasn't just quarterbacks. I was so blown away by some of the defensive plays this week. Talk about game changers.
I know. There were defensive backs out there making these incredible interceptions, linebackers just, flying all over the field to make tackles, defensive linemen disrupting offenses with their power and athleticism.
It's those individual moments of brilliance that really make the NFL so captivating. But what I find so fascinating is how those individual performances then impact the team's overall success.
Well, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? I mean, a great quarterback needs a solid offensive line to protect him, and a dominant defense can really give the offense more opportunities to score points.
Yeah. And as we head towards the playoffs, those individual contributions,
Yeah.
they just become even more crucial. So listeners, keep an eye out for those players that are stepping up and making a difference. They could very well be the deciding factor in who goes all the way.
Oh, yeah. Every play, every snap, it can shift the momentum of a game. And in the playoffs, those small moments, they can have a huge impact on a team's destiny.
Okay, so we've analyzed those upsets, the close calls, the individual performances that shaped Week 13. But the story doesn't end there. We need to dive deeper into what all of this means for the playoff race. Who's in, who's out, and which teams are battling for their postseason lives. Let's break it all down.
Absolutely. The playoff picture is starting to come into focus, but there are still so many teams out there fighting for their chance to compete for that Super Bowl title.
And that's what makes the NFL so unpredictable and so exciting. So let's shift our focus to the bigger picture, the playoff implications, and those teams that are making their final push toward the postseason. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground, upsets, nail-biters, some incredible individual performances out there.
Oh, yeah.
But now it's time to look at that big picture, the playoff race.
You know what I think is fascinating? How much Week 13 really just shook things up. I
Yeah.
mean, we saw some teams, solidify their position while others are kind of facing that must-win situation in these final few weeks.
So let's start in the AFC, where we know the Bills have locked up the East, but those other divisions are still wide open. What are some of the key battles that you're watching?
Well, in the AFC North, that Steelers win over the Bengals, that was a big one.
Okay.
It keeps them right there in that division race, especially with the Ravens having that tough loss to the Eagles.
So it sounds like the AFC North is going to come down to the wire.
Yeah.
And what about the wild card race in the AFC? Who's in the mix there?
Oh, it's a tight race. I
Yeah.
mean, you've got the Dolphins, the Patriots, even the Colts are still in contention, but they can't afford to slip up,
Okay.
Every game from here on out is essentially a playoff game for them.
Talk about pressure.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's switch over to the NFC, where things are, they're just as chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Eagles, they continue to just dominate the East, but those other divisions are still up for grabs.
You know what I think is interesting? The NFC West.
Yeah.
Because that Seahawks recent surge has put them right back in the conversation. And they're really breathing down the necks of those 49ers who just had that tough loss to the Bills.
It really is amazing how quickly things can change in this league. I mean, a few weeks ago, no one was even talking about the Seahawks as a contender, and now they're a team to watch.
I think it's a testament to their resilience and their ability to just adapt throughout the season.
Yeah.
They've found their stride at the right time, and that could make them a really dangerous opponent, come playoff time.
Absolutely. So tight division races, a wild card scramble that's probably going to come down to, to a photo finish.
Oh, yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, which is that importance of those individual performances.
Yeah, those moments of brilliance, those game-changing plays, they often are what determine the outcome of a game.
Exactly. And as we get closer and closer to the playoffs, I think it's so important for everyone listening to really pay attention to those players who are stepping up, making a difference for their teams, because they could be the ones who write the next chapter in NFL history.
They really could. The playoffs are where legends are made, and often it's that single player who can elevate their team to a victory.
So as you're watching these final games of the season, think about those ripple effects that we talked about. How does each outcome affect that playoff race? Who benefits from a certain team's win or loss? And which players are starting to emerge as those potential heroes of their teams?
I think this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
We're on the cusp of the playoffs, and anything can happen. The underdogs can rise up, the established teams can falter, and it all comes down to who can perform when the stakes are the highest.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered so much today: snowy showdowns, overtime thrillers, division clinchers, and of course those teams that are fighting for their playoff lives. But this deep dive, it's really only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, there are countless storylines still unfolding. Rivalries are intensifying, and there's so many more moments that are just waiting to be etched in NFL history.
And as we head into that final stretch of the season, I think the one thing that we know for sure is this. The NFL, it never disappoints.
It does.
The drama, the excitement, the unpredictable nature of the game, it keeps us coming back for more.
It sure does. And if you were a coach heading into these final weeks, which Week 13 outcome would have you most worried? What does it tell you about these teams and the players who are shaping the narrative of this entire season? Keep those questions in mind as we head towards the playoffs. It's going to be an epic ride.